Great, thank you so much, Dixie. I'm going to start by sharing my screen and then we'll get started. Are you all able to see that?
Yes.
Excellent. And then I'm going to turn over to Missy to kick us off.
Hi, everyone. Are you able to hear me okay? Perfect. Awesome. Welcome, everybody, to the Anchorage Museum presentation today. Before we begin, I would like everyone to put down their pencil or pen, if it's a computer mouse you have in your hand or a cell phone. And I'd like for you to place both your fingers or toes on the ground and place both those feet. And I want you to connect with the floor beneath your feet. And I'd like you to close your eyes for a moment, take a deep breath in and exhale. And I want you to connect with the floor beneath your feet. And I want you to think about your favorite place here in Alaska. And I want you to envision the landscape and what is consistent in that landscape. And I'd like to take a moment to thank and honor the Eklutna people. We would like to honor and recognize the Eklutna people, for the Anchorage Museum is situated on their traditional homelands. We would like to acknowledge and honor them for their past and present stewardship upon these lands that the Anchorage Museum resides on. I would like to thank and honor all elders, past, present, and emerging, for their past, present, and future stewardship of the lands, plants, waters, and animals across Alaska. Thank you for that moment. So thank you all for a brief moment, and we're really excited to get talking today and have a guided conversation with each and every one of you. But before we begin and talk a little bit about what's going to take place during this conversation, we're going to go around and introduce ourselves, the facilitators. My name is Missy. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am an educator / department coordinator at the Anchorage Museum. And part of my job is, assisting with school groups and scheduling, whether that's in person or virtual, working with teens on either civic engagement or our teen climate action project that we're doing our second iteration of. It's working with adult audiences and talking about clinical arts, as well as thinking about how that relationship and you can marry medicine and art. And also another big part of our job is, or my job at the museum, is also creating culturally competent curriculum for educators within our school district here. And I'll pass it off to Melissa.
Christine, do you want to jump in there first?
Sure, I can go first. My name's Christine Cassidy Itta, and I am another educator at the Anchorage Museum. Do a lot of different things, as I'm sure all of you do as well. But my primary kind of areas of focus in the education department are the hands-on makerspace and running that and doing programming in school groups and developing activities for that space. And then I also manage our 5 and under programming, Blink, and then also work with Missy in curriculum development, because it used to be a classroom teacher, and so that kind of pulls from my strengths there. So those are kind of the 3 main things, and then I also have lots of other little side projects too.
Yeah, and my name is Molissa Udevitz. Pronouns are she, her, and also an educator at the Anchorage Museum. And the 3 of us are really excited to have a conversation with this group this morning about sort of what we're doing in museum education and how that shifted with the pandemic. I also help with a lot of different programs that we do at the museum. Some areas that I specifically work in are creative aging programs for older adults. Also doing teen climate work, and then also working a lot with school groups and thinking about sensory friendly and accessibility initiatives at our museum. So I want to give you kind of an overview of what to expect in our time together this morning. This is very much going to be a guided conversation, so it might be a bit different than some of the other wonderful sessions I've been able to participate in as part of this Museums Alaska conference. But Missy Christine and myself, our role is really to facilitate this conversation so that we can learn from each other, hear where we're at, and we have some guiding questions to help us do that. But this is really meant to be a conversation, so we hope you will participate, unmute, use the chat, either in Zoom or in Whova, whatever's easiest for you all. And we'll share a little bit about our experience at the Anchorage Museum and our current education initiatives and programs, both in person and virtual. But we recognize we're by no means experts and might have some unique situations at the Anchorage Museum. So we want to learn from all of you. So just a heads up that this is really going to be a facilitated dialogue today. So this is sort of our outline of what kinds of things we're going to hope to touch on. We want to get a sense of who is participating in this discussion very shortly. Then we'll share a little bit about some of the things that the Anchorage Museum has done during the pandemic. Then we'll take some time for us to self-reflect on COVID's impact on existing programming. So if you want to have a notebook or something to write with nearby, that could be helpful. And then we're going to form some breakout rooms so we can have discussions in smaller groups. And there'll be 2 discussion topics. The first one will be barriers in museum education, and we have some more specific questions to help us think through that. Then we'll be in our breakout rooms. We'll come back to this main room, be able to talk as a larger group. Then we'll separate again into a second breakout room where that topic will be museum education experiences and programs. Then again, we'll be able to connect as a larger group for a discussion, questions, and some takeaways. And just so you know, this is a 90-minute session, so we'll go until around 12:45 if discussion allows. Christine, do you want to do this, or is this me?
Sorry, that's probably me. I'm having trouble flipping through everything. So let's see. Okay, so in the chat, we're just going to use the chat for this. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves again, but share a little bit more about your education work at your organization. So you could share your primary role at your institution, but then also kind of give us an idea of like how many staff members you have working on education programs, and what types of programs you're doing, and how you're feeling overall. Like, are you feeling really strong about your education programming? Are you feeling like it's got a lot of challenges and you're just not really sure? Are you just kind of treading water and keeping your head above the water? And just kind of share a little bit about that, because we're going to use that to help kind of guide our discussion later. So you guys can go ahead and just drop some of that in the chat. Great. So those are starting to kind of roll in and give us an idea of what your needs are for this discussion.
Thanks for these answers. We'll maybe give about 2 more minutes to share in the chat. And I'm sure as you all are also seeing, looks like there's a diverse group of organizations that have varying amounts of staff working on education programs. So this is good to see who's here.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of thinking about online programming. That's been the fun thing over the past like year and a half, right? Working with school groups and school districts was another thing I'm seeing popping up a bunch. All right, well, if you're still typing, go ahead and get those in there, but I think we're gonna go ahead and move to the next slide and kind of start our discussion. So you guys can feel free to keep adding that. And Missy's going to talk to you a little bit more about our education programming.
Thank you, Christine, and hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Mine's a little lagged on my end, so apologies if it's lagged as I speak to you all. But before we really talk about museum education and hear from you all in this guided conversation moment, we just want to acknowledge that the Anchorage Museum is a really large institution. We consist of around 90 employees, and our department we have an education department that is completely separate. You know, we are very education focused with a staff around 9 educators that do various projects. You heard a little bit what I do, and that differs some from what Molissa does, and that also differs some from what Christine does, but a lot of us are also overlap, and that's familiar theme with a lot of the educators within our department. We have a lot of different projects that we work on either together or independently with other team members. And we just want to acknowledge that before we really dive into this conversation. And what we've been able to do like during the pandemic was really have our team of 9 educators transition and focus on how can we create these moments and access the museum more accessible virtually. And so with that, we created virtual field trips, which was something new and we've never offered before. As you guys can see on the PowerPoint here, we have online curriculum, which has skyrocketed during the pandemic, which we all spent time focusing, creating curriculum and lesson plans that centered around objects within our Anchorage Museum collection to help support educators at home or in the classroom. We've also shifted some of our programming that took place in person virtually, and that ranged from older adult classes to our teen programming, as well as our Blink and our toddlers. We've done professional development virtually. We've done summer camps virtually, even after school programs. We've shifted our college classes online too. So we did this big transition on things that we were able to take that used to be in person and take them and create them virtually. However, we recognize not every program we were able to successfully turn into a virtual format, but a lot of it we were able to do. And the picture here just shows Molissa leading one of our older adult creative aging classes that was extremely successful in person as well as virtual during the pandemic. We've also to think about different ways in which we can provide access to the museum is we created educational kits for purchases known as our community support education boxes. And these boxes really are wonderful. We still offer them. Today's the last day to actually sign up if anyone's interested in getting the latest box. But what this box does is it allows toddlers, youth, and adults, we create them for all ages, to take kind of the museum and bring it into your home. And we create these portable kits that are designed by museum professionals, and it's full of community source materials, ideas, resources for hands-on fun, learning, and imaginative play. That, again, is great for all learners. And we found this to be also really successful in a way to bring the museum into individuals' homes in a different virtual format than we have previously done before. Again, it's perfect for homeschooling parents, after-school groups, early learning facilities, adult community groups, and individuals. And each box has their own lesson plans to kickstart guidelines and ideas for how to use the box. And the current box that we have now, its theme is water. And then the next theme will be coming up this winter. So just stay tuned for that. We've also, another thing is we shifted into one thing that we really wanted to do was pre-pandemic was really kind of create moments for the museum to support our teen community here within Anchorage. And we've done that in the past with civic engagement. But one of the things is we were able to kind of take something that actually was canceled due to the pandemic that we weren't able to meet in person. And we created a year-long Teens for Climate Action Summit with subsequent teen-led action projects. And we got together around 20 to 30 teens that we met. We created an advisory group consisting of 4 teams, and we were able to work with our community to create solutions and climate awareness and get teens really involved and uplift their voices. And through the success of that, we are now starting our next Teen Climate Communicators program, which will start September 29th. And we're looking for more applicants that are interested that live within the Anchorage area, 9th through 12th grade.
Thanks, Missy. So those are just some examples of the pivots that the Anchorage Museum did, as so many of you all, I'm sure, also experienced, of how to shift things online. And some of these online programs were really successful and were things we wouldn't have been able to do had the pandemic not happened. For example, this Team Climate program was a lot of time in Zoom meetings that if we were also staffing galleries, that wouldn't have been an option during normal times. So before we get into sort of the meat of our discussion, we'd like to invite you to take some time to self-reflect, and you've already started that with your really thoughtful answers in the chat. But just kind of getting us in the right mindset for our conversation, I'd like you to consider these 3 different questions. If you want to jot down some thoughts, you're welcome to do that. And then we'll talk a little bit about how our breakout rooms are going to happen. So we're going to give everyone about 4 minutes to just sort of self-reflect. And in that self-reflection, if you come up with specific questions or things you want to talk about in these breakout rooms, that's great too. So go ahead and sort of finish up some of your reflection thoughts. As Missy, Christine, and I reflected on these questions, one theme that really emerged as we were discussing this is thinking about barriers that we are facing in museum education, both sort of personal and professional barriers, and then also institutional barriers. So that's going to be the topic for our first breakout room. So some of your reflections might help you think through some of these questions. And we are going to split in a moment into 2 different breakout rooms, and there will be an Anchorage Museum educator in each of those rooms to help facilitate the conversation. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up the guiding questions we've come up with to help with this conversation, but also this is a conversation for the people that are in this group. So if there are other things you want to talk about, that's fine. But do remember that our second breakout room topic will be about museum educational experiences and programs. So if you have specific questions about programs or virtual versus in person, maybe hold on to those as well. And so we'll be able to share these questions in the chat once we get into our breakout rooms. And I think we're going to have about 15 minutes in our breakout rooms, so we can hopefully get into some pretty thoughtful conversations, and then we will come back as a large group before going into the second breakout. Is there anything you want to add to that, Christine, in terms of logistics?
Nope. I'm opening all of the breakout rooms now, so you guys can go ahead and move to those.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We'll just wait a second to make sure we're all here. All right, looks like we're mostly back. So we want to create space to be able to share some takeaways or themes that maybe emerged in our small breakout rooms. I can start, and then maybe Missy, I'll pass to you to share some takeaways. Great. So first of all, I feel like kind of maybe a personal takeaway, right, is that we're all in this together. we're in these different places around the state and maybe beyond. But I think a lot of what we're experiencing, we can really relate to, which, I think is important to know that we're not in it alone. But some things that came up in our group is talking about just geographic isolation and reaching, beyond the immediate community is both a challenge and a barrier, but also the pandemic was an opportunity to reach beyond that because of the digital opportunities. We're able to have a larger geographic reach. Another sort of thing that came up was, just actually closing the museums for a period of time created a barrier, of course, for audiences, but also for our workflows. How do we actually get that done? And how do we connect with our communities when we aren't like a physical space that folks can come to? And then sort of our last piece we were trying to talk about is thinking about if there's any barriers we as an institution or as an individual are trying to prioritize overcoming, and talked a lot about how the digital learning curve, both for us and for folks we're trying to reach and do work with, can be challenging, but that's something that we do have some power to address. So that's a lot. I know that was a lot to share. But I'm going to pass it to Missy to see if maybe some themes emerged and then open it up to everyone.
Yeah, so we had some similarities too when we talked about barriers. One of the large things we talked about was staffing is also really hard. And then that transition to pandemic even gave to what do you dedicate time to and how do you make it work? But also some things that were talked about now is also shifting back to in-person experiences and just being cognizant of what's happening now, and given the rises of case numbers and thinking about how do we shift and how do we retransition that. was a really big theme in ours, and just kind of talking about impacts to our institution, museum education across different institutions. Staffing was a large one, or being told to focus on something. So trying to figure out how to kind of balance that, but still become accessible to the public and offer a lot of resources that are powerful and meaningful for the community.
Would anyone else like to share something that stood out from their conversation?
I might say something, Melissa.
Of course, go for it.
I liked that in our breakout room that while we were talking about these barriers, there was also the flip side to almost balance it with all these opportunities, whether it was virtual programming or even shifts into what we were doing as an organization. And so really, while we were kind of maybe depressed a little bit about that, we weren't able to continue kind of carrying on and with our awesome services, we were able to shift and to kind of seek out these new opportunities. So that was great. And also this balance we were talking about between missing the kind of in-person connections, but then we were increasing our accessibility and engagement with audiences through these kind of virtual platforms. So that was also a good kind of balance that we were seeing too. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Yeah, I appreciate that sort of, that really captured sort of the essence of our conversation, that as educators, we were really and are really resilient in this pivot. So even though there are these barriers and challenges, we've pivoted, and there is some good things that have come out of that. Well, Christine, do you want to introduce the next topic? I can share my screen again.
Yeah. So we're gonna kind of transition from that theme of the first one and talking about barriers and focus a little bit more on programs and audiences this time. So you guys will have a chance to kind of talk about transitioning, and if you haven't already chatted about it, making that call. I know some of you guys have brought up making that call between, are we doing in person? Are we going to pivot back to virtual, and kind of like having that discussion? And then also just like capacity there, and discussing audiences you're reaching and how that has changed or adapted, and things that are successful that you're hoping to continue post-pandemic. So you can really just talk a little bit more deeply about your educational experiences and programs. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our breakout rooms, and you guys can head back into those for the rest of this discussion.
Faith, I had a question for your walking tours. How do you time those? Are those when cruise ships come in, or do you see a lot of locals who join those? Because it's a great idea. That's something we would love to do here in Nome. We're just wondering about the timing of it, or how's the best way to get a big group of people.
Cruise ships haven't returned to Valdez, so this summer we did a mix of things. We didn't hire any summer staff, so we gave guided tours at the second of the museum site, remembering Old Valdez. So that was actually in the museum, and there were scheduled times 3 times a week on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturdays. And then walking tours at Old Town, I had a schedule laid out for all of that was promoted. And I looked at the tide levels, and then walked with people usually in the mornings at Old Town. And sometimes those coincided with the same day that we were giving tours at Rove. And then we also had overland coach tours come in, and that the timing of those was dictated by the contract that we had with them. And just for the record, they must have changed those tours at least 5 times. So that most of them I was giving early on Sunday morning when I'm at my very best. I don't know about you. So, but it was still, it was great. And these were people from outside of the lower, outside of Alaska and the lower 48. People who walked with me in the morning at Old Town were locals sometimes, and then also people from outside. And then the people who were at Rove were largely people that were visiting from Alaska and the lower 48. But I'm happy to share how we do this. And it's one of the things that I really think I thrive on. Is, and one of the things, and I'm listening to all of you, that I realize I need to have to infuse with far greater information about the Alaska Native community and Suicide lands where we are. I do that, but I could do that much more robustly, and that's something that I'm going to work on. So.
That's great. Thank you for sharing, Faith.
Welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Faith. That was great to hear about how you're kind of using those and hitting so many different audiences too in one go. So that's really kind of neat to have that opportunity. Just kind of share a couple of takeaways from our groups. We were discussing in ours a lot of positives for how we've changed kind of direction a little bit during the pandemic, but then also discussing that we're not really sure we'd like to keep these things and some of these things that we've changed during the pandemic, but we're not really sure what that's going to look like yet. It's still a huge question mark for a lot of us of how we're going to balance capacity and the in-person and virtual kind of worlds of things, and some of these new things that have popped up during COVID that we'd like to keep, but we have to balance that with some of the before things that we haven't had to do for a while that'll be kind of coming back onto our plates. And so I know that's a huge question for our institution still. And then it was just really nice to hear and be inspired by what programs other museums are doing. So that it was just really nice to hear some of those and kind of get some inspiration from those. Missy, did you want to share anything from your breakout room?
Yeah, so we talked quite a bit about virtual programming and what was successful and how certain programs transitioned at different institutions into a virtual format. And then some institutions were just curious of how other virtual programs worked at other places and what they found to be successful and how to create that meaningful. And so that was really our dialogue, was kind of sharing how we did this and then what we were doing to successful. And then there was a little inquiry regarding the museums. So we talked a little bit about the Anchorage Museum and then how we were able to reach more of an audience virtually, in particular virtual field trips like high school and middle school. And that was something like post-pandemic we weren't able to do. And then also turning our digital resources online. And if it wasn't for the pandemic, we wouldn't have been able to grow our teaching resources to over 100 to what we see today. So it was just a lot of talking about, the success of virtual programming, but also kind of the balance of like now that we're in person and some institutions are resuming in-person experiences, and just kind of, again, being mindful and how the in-person experiences look very different than pre-pandemic, because groups are smaller and just kind of in order to make it a safe space for individuals to come into certain institutions, it's downsizing those in-person experiences quite a bit and then breaking them up. And then when you do that, that then brings, you're using more materials, that takes more time to clean. So it was a lot of talking about how to transition and make those moments work.
Yeah, I want to open it up for a minute and see if anybody else wanted to share any aha moments or takeaways that they got from the breakout rooms.
I would share just another takeaway from our breakout room was talking thinking about how this, pivot was an opportunity to engage with partner organizations or other external organizations and really have conversations about how that relationship can be stronger and that you can support each other, which multiple people talked about in our breakout room. And I know that's also been some of the experience at the Anchorage Museum of really like having time to have some of those more longer range conversations, and building those relationships and partnerships. And I think that's something that many of us, all of us, want to continue now that we've sort of had a chance to lay that framework.
These discussions have gotten me thinking about some things that I've really been seeing work in our community in Juneau. And at the Juneau City Museum, there is a local author, researcher, and I believe she was a reporter, who has begun doing kind of a sensationalist like murder tour in partnership with the City Museum. And every single time it's offered, it's around town, it's outside, they sell out like immediately. People, and it's from locals, it's not from tourism, it's people that are getting really excited to kind of be like, oh, let's learn about some weird stuff we didn't know that happened here. And they've made a point to make it a historic tour, so they are not talking about current or recent events, which helps. I mean, recent in broad terms, right? Like recognizing, of course, that it is quite possible that some people who may have been children when some of these things happened are still alive, and that could be sensitive, but that in a lot of ways it has brought out the local community in a really cool way, with a lot more of that engagement rather than just relying on the summer tourism for those tours.
Yeah, that's a really cool way to kind of expand those tours and include more of a local audience. I know we've also seen some of our walking tour programming and stuff has seen more of a local audience, whereas before, most of our summer tours were really just tourists through the museum. So it's been kind of nice to be able to engage a little bit more deeply with our local audiences too.
I'll also just mention another takeaway that was brought up quite a bit in our group is that a lot of these educational experiences, they are designed by, museum staff and educators. A lot of them are run though by volunteers. And those volunteers usually consist of an older population. So it's just kind of also recognizing that, just trying to be careful as like we also have students who are considered more vulnerable, but also that older population. So just thinking about, again, capacity and time. That where we had pre-pandemic would have been a lot, or not easier, but just you were able to lead more tours and let's say school group experiences because you did have the help of docents or volunteers.
Are we gonna open it up now for Q&A? Is that right, Melissa?
Yeah, I think if any of us want to share specific Anchorage Museum takeaways, we can. And then, yeah, we can just sort of have a concluding discussion. I'll share my screen again. You can see some photos once it switches. There it goes. This is just these are all photos from virtual summer camps. So as you can see, all those students are at home creating things, which was obviously a pivot. We'd never done camps virtually before. And one of our takeaways that we discussed in putting together this conversation is we got really good at creating material kits and dividing out materials to be able to provide for these kinds of programs, which is something we really hadn't done before.
Yeah, because not only did we do summer camps that way, but CoLab, our like hands-on makerspace, partners with Muldoon Elementary on a project-based learning module every year where they are making a wind turbine. And so this year we had to prep material kits for that. And we Zoomed into their classroom in the spring semester, and they were like building it, but we weren't there. And so that was kind of a fun adaptation that still allowed us to work with that audience and that school that we've had a partnership with for several years, but kind of in a new way. So then we actually also, because it was virtual, instead of us going into the school, that allowed us to be able to expand where we taught not only at Muldoon Elementary, but we also partnered with Inlet View Elementary. So we got to do the project with 2 schools and their 5th grade students. So that was kind of an exciting pivot for during this COVID time and those kit materials.
And one other takeaway that was briefly mentioned earlier, but a new program that we embarked on during the pandemic was this teen climate action work. And that was something that lasted the whole academic year. And so we really found some benefits in having that longer term relationship kind of building programs where we were working with the same group of teens over a period of time. And something that we talked about in one of our small groups is about how it's been challenging at times to sort of have that instant feedback or gratification because we're doing programs in a different way right now. And so that teen climate work, by working with the same group of teens and really developing those relationships, we were able to see them actually grow and develop other skills and learn to love public presentations. And that was really rewarding. So I think something Missy, Christine, and I have reflected upon is like, it's important to find those like moments that give you that boost to help us stay inspired as we continue, sort of navigating this still very uncertain time.
And I think just to kind of jump onto that a little bit, Melissa, is a big thing which was really meaningful is that we were able to work for these teens all year long. And it's something we haven't been able to do in the past. Teen schedules are quite complicated given, schooling and extracurricular activities. So it really gave us a moment to have open conversations with the audience who we really wanted the museum to feel like it was their space too, and kind of learn from them as well. So I think that was like a huge takeaway, at least for me, was that we got to talk to teens and we got to learn like what are they interested in, how can the museum be a place from them, and then we also got to support them grow academically and professionally. Like one of the groups actually wrote an article for Edible Alaska that was published. They worked on blog posts and different resources, and it really was a great way to uplift teen voices. And a big takeaway, I think, too, was that a lot of them expressed they didn't realize there were other individuals out there who had similar interest. And so it was like a really great thing to, we can be this place that truly brings individuals together, even virtually. So I think like for me, that was huge because I know one of the themes that came up in one of the groups was isolation. And, these can feel like really isolating times. And so we were able to we can still bring people together virtually and to talk about things that individuals are passionate about, just recognizing also the capacity for that. But that was really wonderful to be able to provide that for teens.
Before we share just our final slides, which are just a little bit about Anchorage Museum logistics or hours and things like that, does anyone else have anything they want to share as a takeaway or something they're carrying with them forward?
Just been really inspirational to hear from everybody and hear all of the good work that people have been doing this past year and a half now across the state. So thank you to you three for kind of leading this conversation and allowing this opportunity, this space for people to kind of share and learn from one another. And I think it's been really great. So thanks, guys.
I would concur and say it's nice to see a bunch of museum educator faces. It wasn't that long ago that we had furloughs and weren't sure how long any of us would be around. So it's nice to see you all and hear about the things you have been doing.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's really neat to hear all the inspiring and great work we've been able to do in these really challenging times. And I would encourage us to stay in communication. In a minute, I think Anchorage Museum folks, we can enter our email addresses in the chat, but feel free to reach out. And I hope, you know, this conversation can continue as we can support one another as we, you know, continue to do this important work, even if it feels challenging at times. And then Missy, do you want to just talk about these last things?
Absolutely. So I shared this with my group, but I'll also share it with everyone. We just talked a little bit about like how the Anchorage Museum was able to create teaching resources during the pandemic in a way that we never were before because certain areas were closed down. So it gave us that time to really create this. And so I encourage everyone to take a moment, look over, email if you have any thoughts or concerns. They range from topics of close looking at art to creating pieces, mentioned like collaborations, even to early learning resources. So it's really wonderful. It's designed for early learners all the way up to high school students. You can use it at home or in your classroom. I've had parents and families do it with their kids at home. So take a moment, look over. Those are our resources page.
And I know my group, sorry, was talking about wanting to include more cultural resources and that kind of thing into some of their programming. And that was one of the things on the resource hub that Missy and Molissa and I actually got to work on developing some curriculum for Anchorage School District on cultural arts. And so we worked with culture bearers and artists focusing on Alaska Native arts from our collection and then having a hands-on component in the classroom. So that was just one thing I know my group was talking about and just wanted to share that resource with you guys. They are on that teaching resource hub and there are more to come.
Yeah, and please feel free to email either of us to talk about the steps that we took. I know Christine briefly mentioned it, but we're very transparent in our process. So we worked with many people within our community as well as our curatorial department. And so we're so happy to talk about that further with anyone. And Molissa provided the emails in the chat. Thank you for that. So if anyone has any questions or thoughts after this, please feel free to send either of us, all of us, an email. And I just wanted to say, you know, the Anchorage Museum is currently open right now. We're open Tuesday through Saturday and on Sundays from noon to 6. So please feel free to come. Our current exhibitions are listed online. Here's some dates of our newest ones. There are some Extra Tufts is still online too. So if you want to check out some that are online, please feel free to do so. And then there's also ones that are opening in person this fall. And we hope to see everyone there. So thank you for everyone for attending. I know Melissa, Christine, I'm very grateful for everyone to share. I know Zoom can sometimes be a little awkward, so I appreciate everyone for your transparency and honesty in order to cultivate a really meaningful and engaging conversation. So thank you all.